Hello everybody, hope you're all doing well and going into this colder season with lots of ammunition in your hands. What I mean is having a lot of food growing in your gardens and a lot of organic matter in your soils. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about something that in the last few days there's been a lot of discussion. I've had a lot of discussions about big picture stuff with several people in this space, in this field. And what comes across a lot is what's your vision of agriculture? I remember this reminds me of a book some of you will have read, and I read multiple times in my youth by Jack Kerouac, On the Road. And there's a bit in there where he says, hardly anybody asks people, what do you want out of life? The important questions get very rarely asked. And it's interesting, isn't it? Like he was arguing that young people get to know each other and get very intimate without ever knowing what the other one, thinks of life and the world, etc. So perhaps it might be useful to put out there a few ideas about agriculture that I've been talking about with some of you, with lots of people. People who know me well on this group will know that I've been talking about this stuff for a while. This is obviously not a manifesto, not a vision of agriculture. It's just a few ideas out there which I'm sure you'll find interesting in one way or another, and please do comment on what you think about this. So the main idea here is that a lot of people say, well, organic, regenerative agriculture is very labor intensive, and we have a saying which is that conventional agriculture is very energy intensive, organic agriculture is labor intensive, and regenerative agriculture is knowledge or design intensive. Nevertheless, there is a lot of labour needed, and people find this very inefficient. They think, well, then perhaps conventional agriculture, even though it's poisonous and this and that, it's more efficient. You can feed more people, you can do the things better. So the argument is that when labour, because labour is very expensive, is a limiting factor, then everything falls apart. Okay, so that's one point. The other. So let's address that. So you'll see that in Eastern, both indigenous and modern societies, labour is rarely a problem. If any of you have read Farmers of 40 Centuries, you'll find that the tales of narration of this amazing situations where the Chinese or the Japanese would have hundreds of people on an acre of land, and would have that land produce like crazy for centuries, for millennia. Thanks to the knowledge and the labour that they were able to put on the land, they were able to feed from a square metre, from an acre, I think up to 40 times or 30 times more than the average acre did in the United States in the early 1900s. And that's because they had labour at hand. It's a society where labour was abundant, even though perhaps other things weren't. And also knowledge and also tradition and the way it was passed on, very strong compared to the West. Now, how can we learn anything from that? I've been talking about this also in public. Not many people seem to pick it up, but I'll do it here because I know you guys are quite ready to take a bit of this in, hopefully. So I noticed that the problem often in our society and the way that agriculture relates with that is that there's a relationship between producer and consumer. Food shouldn't have to deal with those categories because we all need food. There's no producing and consuming of food. We all consume it. In my opinion, we all should at least know how to produce it, and in the best case scenario, produce most of it. In the worst case scenario, produce at least some of it. So how do we do that and fix the labour problem at the same time? Well, you will have noticed that whenever you and I are a customer, we go into a business setting, and we spend money and we have standards. We want that money pays for a certain amount of value. We are like, I spent this money, I want this money to pay for something that's good enough, that's worth that money. And that mentality is not the same that we have when we go out in our garden and harvest our carrot or our beetroot, and it's all a bit munched or a bit wonky. We're not going to throw it away, are we? First of all, because we haven't paid for it, so we're not as picky. And secondly, because we know the work that went into it, and we know that it's natural and it's healthy, it tastes good. So suddenly those standards are lowered just because we haven't spent any money, or just because we have produced it ourselves. And I think that's more the key, not so much the money, but the fact that we have put the work in. We know what it means. We have seen the process. So It is very important to be able to grow our own food, because then we understand what it means to grow food, but also we appreciate food for what it is, not a product, not a commodity, but living energy. Yeah, the things that the energy we're made of. And so I often say the vision I have for not so much agriculture, this would need a much longer video, but the vision I have for small scale operations like ours, obviously I would like to see one per neighborhood. I don't think we need so many big farms. I don't think we need supermarkets and stuff like that. We need small farmers, 1 to 2 acres max. And then every now and then there'll be a bigger farm to produce grains and stuff like that. And every neighborhood would have its own small farm, and people could buy direct from this small farm. And not only that, but they wouldn't be necessarily in a relationship consumer-producer. Because let's look at our business. We do veg boxes, okay? And let's assume we manage to have a very small community around us, and we sell all of our boxes locally, which is already a big challenge, because a lot of people locally wouldn't perhaps buy our veg and buy it from the supermarket, and then we have to sell it somewhere else. But anyway, let's assume that our small community is very happy with what we do, and we sell all of our produce locally, and that is enough to sustain our living expenses. That's great, but that's not the full story. I think what I would prefer that people paid my work and my experience and my produce in is not money, but their time, their energy, their knowledge, if possible, because that's more valuable. As we've said, the limiting factor is labor, and in particular the time of the grower. 9 times out of 10, I do value time over money. In my specific case, because I can get paid for my time relatively easily, but in most case scenarios, growers are more short of time than they are of money, because this is a business that doesn't pay much. Actually, it's a struggle to make a living, but nevertheless, if we had more time, we could perhaps make meats end a lot more easily. And we always see time as the limiting factor. So when you come and buy a box from me, in an ideal future scenario, I could tell you, well, look, in order to have a box from us, you need to be able to pay a little bit, this much and this much, but also to commit to do so many hours a month of volunteering. Suddenly, everything changes. It's such a simple thing, but everything changes because, one, you wouldn't only get produce out of me, you'll get experience, knowledge. You'd also be getting the possibility of working outside in the green. Some people pay for that, because sitting in an office is definitely not good for your health, and being able to have a regular routine of going out there and do physical work is very beneficial for whoever is the customer, between inverted commas. And then we would solve a little bit of the labour problem, because in time we would have a lot of people who are trained and can give a hand, and we value that time more than the money, remember. And then the relationship between producer and consumer would be completely messed up in a way, in a positive way, because you've been part of growing that food. You've seen how it is. So when you're going to buy it from me, when you get it in your box, you're not going to say, oh, this carrot is a bit wonky. You've grown that carrot. So this garden is not my garden anymore, it's our garden. Obviously I'm going to put the management efforts and all the knowledge and the experience and the risk, but you put some of the work in, so you then appreciate that food is energy and it's not only a product. So you can see how this scenario, where a community comes together very locally to work towards producing food, there is no such a thing as my farm and people who buy produce from my farm, but this is our farm, and I am just instrumental to make this work as the grower. I'm saying in this case would be me and Flavia, in another case would be another person or a few people, but somebody who manages the actual farm or the actual market garden. So I invite you to think about this and how we can help flip that mentality where I'm the producer and you are the consumer, and how we can introduce this idea of shared, not only labour, but experience, knowledge, production, and make it fair for everybody, but especially put again the value into what really it is that we do when we work the land, what it is that we do while we are in the green. In these cases, it's not really about buying a product. It is about doing what we're meant to do ecologically, cycling organic matter, eating, choosing and selecting the right types of energy that we want to introduce into our body, and fulfilling a higher goal that we might have in our lives. And this part of this is our relationship with the community. And I think, I'm not saying that this is the best vision that we could have for agriculture in the future, especially on the large scale, but this is a small idea I think if we kind of engage with could change things eventually. We're still very far from it, because when I say things like these, everybody's like, yeah, and everybody nods, but at the end of the day, they're not so willing to spend a bit of time working on a farm. The category of people who can afford buying our vegetables oftentimes are not the type of people who are keen to get their hands dirty, and the other way around. So, food for thought.